Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Nature Friendly Farming Network's Rethink Farming webinar on sustainable fibre production. I'm just going to start with a few bits of housekeeping before we begin the session properly. So just to make you aware, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available on the NFFM website for those who are unable to attend the session. As this is a webinar, your video and audio have been disabled. However, you will still have full use of the Q&A box to put any of your questions in, and we would encourage you to do this throughout the session instead of waiting until the panel discussion at the end. We will answer questions once all the videos and presentations have been completed, and this will take place as part of the panel discussion. And depending on time, we may not be able to get through all the questions, but in this case, we'll look to get back to you after the event with a response. So before we begin, I'd like to set a bit of context as to why we're delivering this webinar. So in a globalized world, what we eat, where it's from, and how it's produced is coming under increasing scrutiny. We must weigh up food production's impacts on climate, nature, and animal welfare, and whether farm production systems serve to improve or degrade the environment. In the debate around farming, nature, and climate, there's increasing recognition that we have to change the way that we produce food. But there's been limited focus on whether production of other goods has a positive impact on people and the planet. In 2021, UK households spent £57 billion on clothes, and most of the clothing and textile products purchased in the UK have made a long journey across the globe before arriving in retailers' shops. The UK clothing and textile industry depends on a global production system designed to minimise costs at each stage of the supply chain. This undoubtedly has environmental impacts, many of which can be negative. In the not too distant past, the UK had a thriving fibre industry, but due to a range of factors, including globalisation, industrialisation, and changing consumer preferences, this once booming sector has declined. It has now reached the point where we have no processing facilities for plant fibres and very limited facilities for processing wool. Looking at wool, it was once viewed as a valuable resource in its own right, but it is now mainly viewed as a byproduct of meat production, while flax for fibre production is often viewed as a relic of the past. This begs the question of whether there is a role for domestic fibre production in the future and whether it can be part of a widespread transition to nature-friendly farming. Despite the large contraction of our domestic fibre sector, there are increasing examples of farmers producing a viable supply of fibre products on a flock-to-shop or farm-to-yard model based on regenerative farming practices. And today we want to tell some of their stories. With that, I'm delighted to welcome today's panelists who will share their experiences of producing sustainable fibre and the potential steps that can be taken to enable more farmers to benefit from the opportunities that this provides. With that, I'd like to start the session by introducing our first panelist, Nature Friendly Farming Network Northern Ireland Vice Chair Helen Keys. Helen farms alongside her husband Charlie in Northern Ireland, and they are the first commercial producers of Irish grown linen in 40 years. Helen is a co-founder of SourceGrow, an online platform to help farmers decide what to grow to suit their soil and local market demand. She is also an entrepreneur in residence at Queen's University Belfast and an innovation broker for the Water Innovation Network, working to create nature-based solutions to improve water quality. To begin with, we're going to show Helen's experience through a video that we recently produced as part of our Rethink Farming series.
I'm Helen Keys. Our farm is just outside Cookstown. It's my husband, Charlie Mallon's family farm, and it's just about 50 acres. And we have a mixture of crops that we grow on the farm. I think the farm has probably been fairly nature friendly throughout its history. It would have, it was a mixed farm for years, and even when it went to dairy and suckler, it was never a very intensive farm. It would have had a low rate of animals for the amount of land. So it's always been fairly nature friendly, and we're benefiting now from, the old meadows that are still there and the very mature trees that are in the woodlands and around the hedgerows. So that's all creates a really nature friendly environment. So we're benefiting really from a lot of stuff that people did years and years ago, and the fact that it didn't ever go down a very intensive route. So traditionally the farm would have been mixed. So there would have been a variety of crops and grown in a crop rotation, and different, just a small number of different animals would have been on the farm. Then over the years it went to dairy, and then it went to a suckler herd. And then when we started farming it, we decided to reduce the livestock and move into things like we started growing flax, we started growing other crops, and we moved into doing more vegetables and things like that. We were in a situation, I think like a lot of farms, where we weren't making enough money from the farm in order to be able to do it full time. So the two of us had other jobs, and that meant that we didn't have the time really to spend on the farm that we would have needed to in order to keep it well maintained and be able to look after the animals properly. So we took a hard decision, particularly hard for my husband Charlie, because it was, you know, his family farm and the herd that his dad had. So took the decision to sell off the herd and move entirely into something that we felt we could manage more easily and that would make more money, would be more profitable for us. I suppose our thinking in the sort of system that we're trying to create on the farm now, it's a combination of lots of things. You know, first and foremost, the farm has to be sustainable, financially sustainable for us, where we want to get to is a position where we can be working on the farm and making a good living out of it. But at the same time, that can't be at the cost of, you know, our soil, our water, our air, and so on. So we need to do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable as well as financially sustainable. So we're trying to get that balance of a way of working. But I think those kind of systems are easy to adopt on a farm like this, especially of this kind of scale, and especially because we already have lots of good natural assets on the farm. What got us interested in the flax in the first instance was we were looking for Irish linen and couldn't find any that had actually been grown in Ireland. And it was one of those kind of very naively sort of said, well, we've got a field. We know that it was growing on our farm and pretty much every other farm in Northern Ireland at some point. So we knew it was an easy crop to grow. So it was that kind of quite naively stumbling into it and thinking, sure, we'll give this a go. You know, there's a good chance it's going to make a bit more profit than what we were doing with the field at that stage. So we thought it would be worth having a go at it. There are so many mistakes that we made along the way, but that's kind of what innovation's about, isn't it? I mean, you have a go at something, you learn loads from that, you do it better next time. And the very first year that we grew flax, we planted the wrong variety, we planted at the wrong seeding rate, we did almost everything wrong, and it was a disaster. But we learned so much, and actually, you know, we got loads of people came around to help us, loads of people told us what we've been doing wrong, and we learned so much from that. And every year we've done it a little bit better and a little bit better, and now we're getting pretty good at it. The benefit here is that you know, we're not ploughing, so you don't have that carbon cost. You're not putting loads of inputs into it as well. So overall, when we look at the farm as a whole, the fact that, you know, we're managing it in that way, we've got lots of mature hedgerows, bits of woodland, bits of wetland, and not using loads of machinery. So all of that gives us a really good carbon score. We have done carbon counting on the farm. We've used the sort of toolkits and so on. And I think, you know, this sort of farming where you've got these big natural areas, especially where you've got areas of wetland and you've got, you know, where you've got hedgerows that are really mature and wild, you know, all of those are going to count towards a really much more positive carbon score. So all of that's beneficial. I think a really healthy farming system here would consist of a much bigger variety and diversity of crops and products, and that will include livestock. Obviously that should still be there, but there's lots of opportunities for other things as well. And I think, you know, right across the whole horticulture, agroforestry, fibre crops, all of those things, within those there's also lots of little niches. So, you know, it would be mad for us to all start jumping into one thing. We shouldn't all start jumping into, you know, flax or something like that. We need to find that diversity in our farming system. So, you know, lots more of us could be growing flax and things like that, but there's a wide variety of other things that we could be growing too. suppose the first thing I'd say is, you know, do it a little bit at a time. A bit of trial and error is great. And as I say, you know, we did a lot of things wrong in our first year, but we learned loads from that, and that it was worth doing just from that point of view alone. So, you know, I wouldn't be risking too much in one go. I think is a good thing, you know, have a go. I think also just one of the things, because we didn't really have that much knowledge about what we were doing, we sought out loads of people who knew what we didn't know, and we just went and, you know, we just asked loads of questions. And don't be scared of doing that, because there's an awful lot of wisdom and knowledge out there in the countryside. And, you know, we went and spoke to other farmers, we spoke to our relatives, we read old books online, and we you know, it was unbelievable the amount of wisdom and knowledge that people were willing to offer us. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of people who came up the lane to us and, you know, offered to help or offered to, you know, give us advice, and we just learned a huge amount from that. So going into anything new, I guess, a little bit at a time, trial and error, and, you know, get as much support for it as you can. We think about the environment, and we think about nature and sustainability really in all the decisions that we make on the farm. So everything from, you know, when we're choosing what we're going to grow, we're looking for crops that will be beneficial for things like pollinators, for birds and so on as well. And we think about where we're planting stuff. We think about you know, if we have to plough or things like that, we think about that very carefully. We only do it very limited amount. We let the hedgerows grow fairly wild, which is, I mean, we immediately see the benefit from having those big wild hedgerows, and not just for the sort of nuts and berries that we can harvest for ourselves, but also as nature corridors and allowing wildlife to thrive in those areas. And we find that if they have plenty there, they tend to leave the crops alone. We think about water particularly. We have little streams running around both sides of the farm, so we're very conscious about, you know, keeping those in good nick and making sure there's no pollution. We've very little risk of that anyway, because we don't use a lot of, we don't put out a lot of slurry, we don't use fertilizer or anything or pesticides or anything like that on the farm. So the waterways are kept really nice and clean, and we can see that wildlife's thriving in those. We have otters and things like that, and even the tiny little stream that runs around the bottom of the farm. I think on our farm, because the way that we farm is natural by its nature, it's low input, and low input means lower costs. So we're not spending as much money as we might on things like you know, fertilizer and pesticides and all of those kind of things. So that definitely saves us money.
Excellent, thank you. That was a fantastic video, I thought, and yeah, we've touched on the fibre side through Helen's work, and now I'd like to introduce our second panelist, Jillian McEwan from Lunan Bay, who's going to discuss some of the work that she's done bringing in cashmere production in Scotland. So take it away, Jillian.
Thanks very much, Phil, for that introduction. I'll just quickly share my screen. See that? So yes, today I'm going to talk about our Scottish cashmere story and how we got into it. We're based at Lunan Bay Farm in the northeast of Scotland. Back in 2016, my husband and I, Neil, got into farming and came to it completely new with very little expertise in the area, and decided we wanted to adopt a regenerative approach to farming. And our ethos really is to produce nutrient-dense food and ethical fibre with the objective to work in harmony with nature, and also being able to shorten the supply chain between the farm and the consumer, which is really important to us, along with making a viable business. So to adopt a regenerative principle, a key principle, that's adopting introducing livestock to your farm. So after lots of research, we decided to go for goats, and there's numerous benefits that goats do bring to your farm. First and foremost for us was the environmental benefits that they bring in terms of, I'll explain in the next slide the detailed environmental benefits they do bring to our farm. Another benefit for us is the cashmere fibre that they produce, along with meat. We also sell our goats, and we have a pedigree stud line as well. We've dabbled in conservation grazing over the years as well, and I think that's quite an important income stream. And more recently, we've dipped into agritourism and we've just come off the back of running some popular goats and coats farm tours this Easter. And it's also led us into doing more work with farm education, using goats as therapy, educational purposes, working with schools and other academic institutes. And also, you know, goats are just really good to be around. They're great companions. They're not flighty like, you know, sheep, and they'll come, you know, it's good in terms of our personal goat therapy. So that was why we really got into goats and adopted them on the farm. So in terms of the environmental benefits that they bring, the key point is here that the goats have to be well managed, like all livestock. If you have a well managed herd, through adopting different protocols, then you'll find that they can bring numerous benefits. So for us, the main reason was to enrich our soil health. There hadn't been livestock on our farm for over 50 years, so we were keen to try and improve the organic matter in our soil. Something that's really quite unique to goats is that they remove noxious weeds permanently. They're actually browsers rather than grazers, so they'll preferentially select plants that other livestock would leave behind, such as docks. I know that can be a real problem for cattle farmers, and they'll also go for really woody types of plants, such as gorse and brush and nettle, you know, and they've got such a physiology that once they remove those weeds, you'll never see them again on your farm. So there's lots of other benefits in terms of soil health. You know, they're targeting deep-rooted plants that bring up trace minerals to the surface. They'll have a very low carbon footprint, and also we've seen that firsthand they can increase biodiversity on our farm if managed correctly. So the way that we manage the goats correctly on our farm, we've found, is by implementing rotational grazing. Now, what that does is basically encourages vegetative growth. It decreases the invasive weeds and also helps the local grass species to flourish. And in addition to that, it's really excellent for reducing the worm burden. Goats tend to have quite high worm burden, and they're quite good at hiding when they've got something clinically wrong with them, which is normally associated with a high parasitic burden. So we've found that by introducing that way of grazing, it can definitely improve their GI health. We also introduced herbal leys. So for people who aren't familiar with that, that's basically multi-species grasses and herbs that we grow to increase forage legume biodiversity and also nitrogen levels. And alongside the herbal leys, we've introduced cover crops as well that we allow the livestock to go in after the specific dates. So in addition to the other nature-friendly herbs and land management, to get was secure fencing. So in addition to the fencing, we also incorporated 5,000 hedgerows and trees that we planted in collaboration trust. And we're also creating other habitat to support the biodiversity that works alongside the goats. And we're involved in things like RSPB corn bunting schemes, where we're given over specific areas of land for habitat, stable habitat conservation. So basically, in terms of the cashmere side of things, so not a lot of people realise that cashmere fibres from goats. I mean, why would you, unless you kind of sat down and researched it? But we discovered that we had the only herd of commercial cashmere goats in the whole of the UK. All of the cashmere that you purchase currently is not homegrown here. It's actually made from fibres that have been imported from China and other parts of Asia, but it's processed in this country, and that's why it can be classified as Scottish. We do have, you know, generations of expertise in milling, certainly at the larger scale, and we've got the technology and innovation, but certainly at the smaller scale, a lot of that has died out. So base is the undercoat that grow fibre that you can buy commercially. It's very, very light and it's extremely insulative. So that's why it's highly sought after, and there's an insatiable appetite for cashmere because of that. This has led to an environmental impact in these Asian countries where there's overpopulation of goats due to the appetite for cashmere, and there's also issues with the moralistic effects on the labour, not truly the price of the garment. So we got into cashmere a couple of years ago. It's been a long project coming to fruition, and that's partly due to the fact the rate limiting factor was lack of mills that are willing to work on a smaller scale. And there's also complexities involving the processing of cashmere compared to processing wool from sheep, for example. So one of the complexities with cashmere harvesting is that each goat produces only 250 grams per annum, because it is the undercoat of the goat rather than the whole fleece. So when you put that into comparison with sheep, you're typically getting about 3 kilograms of fleece. So we're really talking about tiny amounts, and that's hand combed from the goats, which is another labour intensive part, which we don't mind because it's the time of year we're harvesting that we're doing health checks on the goats anyway, because it's just after kidding time for us. So it's quite a labour intensive process, and you're also producing very small amounts. So all of our goats are fibre tested, and we bring in specialists to help with that. And we're looking at various different characteristics. I'll not go into too much detail, but you're looking at things like micron size, staple length, curvature, all the properties that you would want to be very good in terms of selecting your bucks for breeding, and also thinking about how it's going to be processed and the end product for the consumer. So just to touch on the history of homegrown Scottish cashmere. So back in the 90s, there was a cooperative called the Scottish Cashmere Producers Association. And basically this was a co-op of about over 100 farmers in Scotland. It was a Scottish government funded project and working alongside academics. And it was looking at whether cashmere was a viable alternative, viable, for example. And at one point there was over 5,000 cashmere goats on the project, and it ran for 10 years. Part of my research has been to go and track down some of these farmers who are now in their sort of 80s, and really kind of pick their brains and find out, you know, what went wrong, you know, why is there not a thriving Scottish cashmere, homegrown Scottish cashmere industry now? And you know, depending on who you spoke to, there was lots of different outputs. And one of the reasons back then is there wasn't really a vehicle for direct selling back then. If you think about it, there was no internet, just social media. It was really difficult for farmers to connect with their end consumer. I mean, they had Johnson's of Elgin they were using to produce all their garments, but back then there just wasn't that vehicle to be able to reach out to lots of different customer bases and really sell the story of how difficult cashmere is to produce and the complexities in the process, and has learnt from that project. And our time that we've had enough cashmere to really launch the product back in autumn last year, that there is, you know, a huge appetite for sustainable textiles. One example of this was we literally launched our cashmere, and within a week we were contacted by, this was the Elder Statesmen, who are a cashmere brand based in LA, who ended up were the first designer to source our cashmere, and they came over and did a photo shoot. This is at Lunan Bay at our farm, and ended up releasing a series of a range of socks, which was great. And we didn't really, you know, these customers are coming to us because they see what we're doing on social media to promote, you know, the behind the scenes of what goes on the farm, and you know, the way that we're working regeneratively. But it was key for us to be working as well with local markets. So we reached out to various local designers and crafters and makers, and we're working closely with them. As I mentioned briefly, one of the issues with small scale textile production is the lack of micro mills. Luckily, we found one in Scotland who were willing to work alongside us, but that took a long time to get off the ground. And I know that many other wool producers or farmers who are looking to get into turning their wool and turning their fleeces and forward as an industry, we need to address of low yields of cashmere is by blending the cashmere with other native breed sheep. And we've found that this is a really great way to transform fibres that don't have a huge deal of value to something that has got really transforms the softness and the utility of that product. We're working alongside other farmers who have native breed sheep. We've actually just purchased some of our own Shetland sheep to do that as well. And in addition to this, because we know that there's a weakness in our business plan with there being only one mill in Scotland that we can use to make cashmere at the moment, we're now working with local spinners, and we're forming a network just in our local region who can help us continue to produce yarn with our cashmere, so we're not so reliant on just one mill. But it is a challenge. So far we've gone out and we've been selling direct to makers, as I said, through mail order. We also have been featuring at various wool shows, and I was so surprised by the whole appetite there is from the community for natural fibres, which have been made regeneratively. I just came back from doing a recent talk that was held in September, which was actually sold out, and it was really well received. So I think there is a huge potential there. We've also started to make our own garments as well. So we're collaborating with small with makers in order to shorten that supply chain and showcase our yarns. And also working closely with the community. So as I said, one of our income streams has been agritourism. We created this thing that kind of grew arms and legs called Goats and Coats to launch the cashmere last year. And it involved for our kids, and it turned into visits on the farm where people could really learn about the full story from farm to fibre, where we had spinners on site spinning our yarn, and it then led to us running these open days, which attracted sort of 500 people each day to the farm. So I do think that there's real potential here, people really keen to buy and at the true value of what these natural fibres are, and are really keen to create products. And I think it's definitely for us, it's been a real eye-opener about the potential that's out there. And I'll just finish up and I'll take some questions about what we're doing later. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a feel for what we've done so far.
Thank you, Jillian. That's excellent and really, really interesting story, and really clear there's quite a lot of demand for what you're doing, and then I suppose a really interesting kind of community link through there as well. We've got one more presentation to go through before we go into the panel discussion, and just for everyone to, if there's any more questions, to put them into the chat box because our Q&A function isn't working. There's been quite a few questions around supply chain and processing and things like that, and our next panelists, Kit and Malú from Fibreshed Ireland, are going to provide a little bit of insight on that front in terms of how they've worked to help develop supply chains, but also to incentivize knowledge exchange between farmers as well around regenerative practices. So I'd like to welcome both of them to share their screen and tell their story as well.
Hi, I'm just going to share the screen, and yeah, you should be able to see that. So hi everyone, I am Malú Colorín, and along with Kit, who is also here, we're the co-founders of Fibreshed Ireland, and we're very happy to be here. Now, how do I always struggle with moving the thing. There we go. So yeah, Fibreshed Ireland, we are a community supported not-for-profit organization, and we're also an independent affiliate of the global Fibreshed movement. So this is a movement that started in California over 10 years ago, and it is centered around creating an alternative framework for our current globalized and very, very heavily fossil-dependent textile industries. So, and we know this comes with very negative environmental and social impacts, this type of system. So we're trying to move away from that, reconnecting with our local textile networks, with our local environment, and the resources, the people that we have locally, and helping to build equitable textile networks throughout this purpose. So we are working to adapt and grow. We're working to adapt and grow the Fibreshed ethos throughout the island of Ireland, and we are very closely linked with other Fibreshed affiliates around the world, especially, of course, in the UK, there's a few of them, and in the EU. So we are grounded in the concept of soil-to-soil systems, and basically this is a system in which textiles are produced from natural materials and inputs, and therefore at the end of their life and at the end of kind of every process, they can be returned to the soil very, very safely. And yeah, so of course, this is the foundation. By returning our textiles to the soil, we can of course then use that to grow new textiles, grow new pasture, or whatever. Use this as part of a rotation crop system. So it's it's a very, very, I guess it's the ultimate circular solution, because there's no waste. Everything that is considered quote unquote waste can just go back to the soil and generate new life. and well, this is part because Ireland and the UK, as we probably all know, once had a thriving textile industry, and it was very intimately connected to the agricultural and natural landscapes. But of course, especially with the shift to synthetic fibers after the Industrial Revolution, this changed. Farming and fashion have been, just like food, as many of you surely already know, they've become really, really disconnected from the local landscape and with the indigenous textile resources and the indigenous textile culture that we have in our islands. So it's become very, very, the textile culture has diminished greatly. And of course, this doesn't mean that we want things to go back to the way they are, just the way they are. Not at all. You know, we see this as an opportunity to look back and reflect at what was good, what was bad, what was the ugly things, and build from that to forge a new, different path, one that is centered on, as we said, on the soil and on creating local networks. So yeah, we see this as a great opportunity. We look at the system in a holistic way. So from the growing of the fibers all the way to the end consumer. And this, you know, this holistic approach really allows us to find new ways to do things, new ways that are actually based on very, very old ways as well. So yeah, we take the best from the old and bring it forth in a new way, in a way that is better aligned with the values we have today.
Hi, yeah, so this is Kit. I'll take over from here. Yeah, so that idea kind of takes us into this question about asking what are these values that we hold on to today? What kind of textile and agricultural systems is it that we want to develop from this point onwards? And this question is alongside the Fibreshed climate beneficial fibre framework over in California there. Has led Fibreshed Ireland to begin developing this idea of an Irish-grown regenerative textile. Now, we are in the very early stages of developing this idea. At present, we have a group of 10 fibre growers across the island. Very happy to say that Helen here is one of them. And we brought this group together to form a knowledge transfer group and to begin exploring that very question about what values is it we want to support through our textile and our agricultural systems. What is it that we mean when we talk about a regenerative textile? So along the kind of top row of the slide here, we can see perhaps some of the more obvious goals of regenerative agricultural practices. The soil carbon, soil biodiversity, habitat diversity, the natural productivity. But for Malú and myself, it's really important that we try to take a broader, more holistic view and include some of these other more socio-economic and cultural aspects of regeneration. So regenerating local knowledge. I always point out how many kids can instantly recognize a lion and a giraffe, but how many of them could name 5 birds that crop up in their garden or their parks, or 5 trees that are growing in the local hedgerows. We also want to look at regenerating cultural and creative heritage. We commonly think of national dress as being one of the identifying features of cultures, but the reality is that our fashion has become just as globally homogenized as many other aspects of our lives. There's a definite trend of decreasing cultural diversity alongside our decreasing biodiversity. Sorry, forgot to put my video on there. So yeah, we also want to look at regenerating community networks, local economies, producer consumer relationships, and also, of course, regenerating, or rather re-celebrating the fibre quality and diversity of the islands. The UK especially has an amazing diversity of sheep breeds, each suited to different applications and adapted to their local landscapes, and yet the global wool market is dominated by a single breed, that of the merino sheep. So yeah, if we hop on to the next slide there, just a very quick look at some of the changes that are needed to make this shift happen. And obviously the big change is for the processing infrastructure to be, I think, not just rebuilt, but also updated so that it can run in harmony with our current value systems. So for Fibreshed Ireland, that would be fibre mills that are community owned and regionally based and running on renewable energy. But there are, I think, more fundamental systems changes that we need to start questioning. And each one of these is a huge topic, which we can't really go into at the moment. But just to touch on a couple of them, obviously our agricultural systems, we need to kind of change from this idea of extraction to reciprocity, so that we're giving back to the ecosystems and starting to regenerate our landscapes. Industrial, we need to shift kind of from resource to relationship and decommodify the people and planet. And the last one there, just to touch on, I think, is the financial system, moving from unquestioned acquisition to a more balanced distribution and flow of financial capital. And the reason I think that this is so important to kind of include in discussions going forward is because we're always being asked how this type of framework can be made profitable. And I mean, of course, this is a essential question. We need to make sure that the enterprises are viable, financially viable going forward. And although I do believe that a regenerative fibre framework can be made profitable, I think there's more important considerations, or just as important, certainly. And this is the idea of these alternative value flows. So looking at the non-financial returns that a farming system and a textile system like this can bring us. So the ecosystem services, the community relationships that are being built up, the creative and cultural renewal. And it also brings us back to this question of why, why are we working towards this new, more regenerative system? Are we looking purely for the quantitative benefits that it can bring, or is it also for the more qualitative rewards that come alongside it? Yes, I'm very aware of the time there, so we'll finish up there, and I'll just say, if you want to know more about what we're doing or want to get involved, then check out our website. And of course, there's numerous Fibreshed affiliates spread across England and Wales and Scotland. So, reach out to them as well and see what they're up to. We are all independent, so they won't necessarily be doing the same thing. But as Malú said, we're all in very close contact and communication with each other. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, guys. Really, really interesting stuff. And it's amazing to see what you've done already and what the potential is kind of moving forward. Could I just ask the rest of the panelists to turn on their cameras as well? We'll go through a bit of a discussion on what we've spoken about and answer some of the questions that we have been given from the audience as well. And there's, I suppose, some points in it that I want to ask a question around kind of opportunity and scale. And I suppose there's the argument at the moment that this is niche and that it might only ever be niche. And what's the response to that, and what's the potential in terms of scaling it up, and what needs to happen in your opinion? And that's open to anyone to come in on that.
I could just quickly contribute that. I think, yes, it is scalable, but more than scalable, I think it's replicable. I think we should be thinking about economies of replicability rather than economies of scale. So instead of growing one single kind of centralized system, that is, at least in Fibreshed, the ethos is we're not trying to, have one central mill service everything and everyone. It's rather, we see it as, can we build, for example, a small scale mill or a middle scale mill that can service this local area, and that can this model then be replicated in other local areas. So it's more about replicability than scalability in the way we see it.
Perfect, thank you. Helen, Jillian, anyone want to comment on top of that?
Yeah, I would say that certainly from the market research out there that we have done, and the contacts of people, every other day I have someone contacting me saying they're setting up a sustainable knitwear company, and there's just so much opportunity out there, and the whole demand for the whole cashmere industry, it's a multi-million-pound industry, even though we're using imported fibres at the moment. And if you combine that with the fact that so many people want to source local, the textile industry will eventually go the same way that the food did sort of 10-15 years ago. So I think there is a great opportunity there, and the fact that it's so easy to target all these different routes to market the world and the community is a much smaller place now. I think there's real huge possibility for people.
Perfect, thank you. Helen, do you want to add anything on to that?
I just totally agree. Replicable rather than scalable, and that's when you think about when it was working really well, and when it was, you know, when every farm had a bit of flax or fibre or some kind of crop growing on it. It was at that kind of small localized scale where there was that localized processing as well. So I think, you know, that model has worked before, and there's an opportunity to go back to that, certainly.
Perfect, thank you. There's a few questions coming in here just in terms of accessing markets and experiences around that, how difficult it has been or what you've done, and any advice on that front. Again, open to anyone who wants to come in.
Well, I think Jillian mentioned earlier about Instagram, and that has been our kind of main route to market so far as well. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but having those kind of tools nowadays is fantastic. I have to say, we have only literally just in the last month finally got to the stage where we have a bit of product to sell in the form of in the form of flax fibre, which, you know, is available for hand spinners. So it's very, very early days for us, but it's the same as Jillian mentioned, where, you know, I'm contacted by people all the time about, you know, when we will have spun and woven linen available for sale. I'm contacted all the time, so the pull is definitely there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There is a huge appetite. You don't have to work hard to go out and sell your product. The people come to you as long as you are showcasing what you're doing through Instagram and other routes, really showing what goes into how you make that product, and, you know, the effort and the fact that you're doing it regeneratively. People just come to you. I find, you know, it is. I spend a lot of time, you know, on social media and promoting what we're doing, and but it definitely is. I find that it's not that hard work really, and there's lots of different routes, whether it's designers or you know, small makers or community groups. There's so many different routes out there. It's just as long as you consistently share your story on a daily basis with what you're doing. I know everyone's busy on the farm, but it definitely does pay dividends, and the opportunities that come to you because you're so transparent about what you're doing on the farm, I think it pays off for sure.
And there's a clear link between, yeah, being able to explain the benefits to nature and the environment and everything, from kind of changes in management or continuing existing management. And there's a question in here just in terms of what sorts of increases in wildlife you've seen on your own farms as a result of doing these things. And I suppose, Helen, from your perspective, you've moved into arable production after livestock production for a period of time. Is there anything you want to describe on that front? And then, yeah, Jillian, obviously the work you referenced around corn buntings and things, quite interesting too.
Yeah, we certainly, when we have flax out in flower in the middle of the summer, you can hear the field, the noise coming off the field, the sort of buzzing, and the amount of insects in it is phenomenal. It's great to see. So certainly, I you know, that's quite a phenomenon. It's really noticeable. The other thing that happened on the farm, these flocks of birds turned up the first year we planted flax, which I didn't really know. I hadn't really known. I don't know if they'd always been there and I just hadn't noticed them, but they turned up in droves the first year we planted flax, and it turned out they were linnets, which I hadn't realised were. I think they're sort of named for flax, for the flax plant. So. Yeah, linnets feature a lot now on the farm.
Yeah, I mean, we were the same since we turned over a significant proportion of the farm to grasslands. and then subsequently introduced herbal leis as, you know, a forage source, but also as a source for wildlife fodder for feed. But you know, these fields are absolutely buzzing with bird life and activity. We also, you know, planted 15 acres of sunflowers last year specifically to create habitat. And you know, once they died off, the goats went in and ate the rest of the stalks that would have just, you know, they're too woody to do anything else with. But obviously that type of food source is perfect for goats. And that from the several months that flowers were out, and you know, once they went into seed as well, we actually have a bird hide that the local bird club use on our site, on our farm. They came down and did some surveys, and they just couldn't believe the amount of diversity in terms of bird population as well. So yeah, I think it all fits in. Like when we were growing asparagus previously, because that's a long-term perennial, we were keen for that to fit with the kind of cycle of our farm. So what we do is you plant the asparagus, it stays in the ground for up to 10 years. So this creates a stable habitat for bird life. So we were seeing things like lapwings we'd never seen on the farm before. They were nesting, and because of the minimal disturbance on the field, it meant that more birds created this a nesting site because there was minimal disruption. Then once the birds had fledged and went off, then we put the goats in to eat off the rest of the woody spears and the shaws. So it's all part of the kind of cycle on the farm. Nothing's wasted, and you know, every part of the ecosystem, they get a chance. So the goats get a chance to feed, and then the birds get a chance to thrive. So yeah, I think it's being mindful of the different stages and allowing, you know, nature to get in and to have that opportunity and provide that environment to do that.
And then obviously you've all demonstrated that this can be achieved. There's potential to scale it up and to do it in a way which is kind of benefiting people, planet, all sorts of different things. And obviously across the UK and also within the EU as well, farming and land use policies are changing. And do you think there's greater scope to support flax production? And if so, not just flax, fibre production, and if so, what sort of help do you think's needed on that front? Is it advice? Is it investment in the processing? What would it be?
I'll comment a little on that. Just on I think there's a huge missing link with the infrastructure. You know, if everyone was to start farming cashmere or wool for fibre or flax tomorrow, you know, there's a huge gap in that processing chain where there's a limit to how much fibre can be converted into what the consumer wants at the minute. And so there really is a huge need for that processing gap, that infrastructure gap to be filled.
Anyone else want to come in on top of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo this as to what Kit was saying. Basically, yeah, you'll find that the infrastructure doesn't exist at the moment. You're relying on micro mills, and you know that there needs to be some support in order for more cooperatives to get together, and also things like you know, obviously goats are quite niche at the moment. There's no support for goats, and you know, they provide a lot of the same environmental benefits as other ruminants like cattle and sheep. So I think it's important, it's a crucial time now for us to be lobbying while all these new policies are being created to make sure that, you know, the efforts that we're putting towards regenerative activities, whether it's using goats in a sustainable way, is actually included in these policies, and you don't miss out because you're doing something that's quite niche. But there is the scope there for other farmers to benefit from the pioneer and innovative work that you're doing.
Thank you. And there's a question here in terms of challenges, and to Helen and Jillian, what have been the biggest challenges in terms of flax and also cashmere?
I'll say first, Jillian, if that's okay.
Yes.
Biggest challenges for us, well, as I mentioned in the video, we did a lot of stuff wrong to start with, but benefited a lot from the fact that there are people around us who knew what they were doing and remembered how it was going and so on. And the biggest challenge, I think, now is going back to the infrastructure side of things. So the processing is basic. We can sow it, we can grow it, we can harvest it with a lot of backup and community effort and people coming in to help us. We're also able to ret it, which is the next stage in the process, and we can do that in a way that's kind of river friendly now, which was one of the main problems around the linen industry, was the impact that it had on rivers. But we're able to handle that now and do it in a way, because we ret it in tanks and then use the retting water as fertilizer. So all of that, and yes, Maria and Leo absolutely have it. Spinning is the big gap. To get to the point, we are very lucky in Northern Ireland and throughout the UK and Ireland. We still have weavers, great weavers that can weave linen, and we even have, I think, one of the last, if not the last, beetler in Northern Ireland, beetlings, where you give a nice sheen and strength to the fabric at the end. But the big gap is spinning. So we're lucky. We've got the Ulster Guild of Spinners, Weavers and Dyers, and there's lots of hand spinners around the country. So we are at a point where we can produce hand spun and hand woven linen, but to be able to do anything by machine, we need spinning facilities somewhere in the UK or Ireland. Other than that, I mean, we're looking at, I think, sending it to, you'd have to send it to Northern Europe, which is okay, but it would be great to have it a bit more local.
Mm-hmm. Yes, same challenges here as the infrastructure. So, for the cost of a micro mill, you're talking about £250,000 to get that set up. So, ideally you want to have multiple micro mills all over the country that you can tap into, and each of these micro mills will have their specific expertise. So with cashmere processing, you have an additional stage where you've got to dehair the guard hair from the fibre, and that involves a specialist bit of kit, and that was one of the reasons why it took us so long to get our product out, because we couldn't find anyone with a dehairing machine. And even now we've found one, there's different quality types of the machine, different categories of it. So yeah, the infrastructure is going to be a challenge, but as you say, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that can hand spin, and we've joined up, starting to join the dots. We've now created a community group of spinners just in our local village of 20 people turned up who want to learn to spin. So it's it's small steps, but it shows the real appetite there is for people to want to learn these traditional skills. And it's been amazing how much of the younger generation want to do it as well. And going into schools and being involved in sort of sustainability projects, and working alongside them to promote to the kids about slow fashion and how we should really be thinking about where our textiles are from, and getting them on board. So it's a big movement, and the folks at Fibreshed are great at promoting that side of it. I mean, we're a little bit behind. In Scotland, we do have Fibreshed set up, but there's just one person that's sort of getting it off the ground, and we're forming the network. So there's a lot of work to do with the network forming, and the infrastructure are the main challenges at the moment.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm just aware of time, so one last question to wrap up for each panelist. And if you had one piece of advice to a farmer or farmers who are considering moving into this, what would it be? And in 20 to 30 seconds, if possible. So I'll start with Kit.
I'd say if, whatever it is you're farming, whether it's sheep or goats or flax, and you're wanting to access the market for that fibre, I'd say try and learn as much as you can about how that fibre is used. So if you're trying to access a crafting market, which is probably the most likely avenue because it is so niche at the minute and there is that infrastructure gap, then try and learn a little bit about how, you know, if you've got wool, for example, how does that wool need to be used, and how does a crafter or how does the consumer maybe want to have that wool presented to them? Because there's a lot of crafters out there, wool crafters, who would want to use local wool, but the thought of being given this greasy, straight off the sheep fleece can be a little daunting for them. So there's, you know, try a little bit of understanding on that side, and the crafter needs to come and understand a bit from the farmer's side as well. Sorry, that was more than 30 seconds.
No worries. Helen?
I think just asking questions for me. I mean, we were just so lucky that we had so many people we could call on and who were so generous with their time, and yeah, just get up again other people and ask a lot of questions. We're hoping to run a few open days at the farm during the summer when the flax is in flower, and during the harvest we're always happy to welcome people to come and help with the harvest. So yeah, if you want to come and see what we're doing.
Jillian?
You know, just if you're naturally inquisitive and you like to get your teeth into something and try something pioneering and innovative, and you've got the resilience to keep going when you don't have the kind of infrastructure there, but you can see the future, and you think it could be a really commercially viable and great part of your business. I think, yeah, just keep going at it. But you really have to have a passion for it, and do the research, get out there and speak to the makers and the processors, and really dive deep into it, which isn't always the easiest when you're running a farm at the same time. But I think if you're passionate enough about it, then it just comes naturally. So yeah, just get really into it, I would say.
Thank you. And that is us actually over time. We could go on. So just like to say a massive thank you to you all for coming in to be involved in this discussion. Find it really, really interesting. And what's kind of struck me is that there's massive benefits, massive potential, but we need to start looking at it a little bit more. And we need that kind of bigger thinking to kind of really get the infrastructure in place to deliver this at the scale at which its potential. So just like to say thank you to you guys, and thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And the recording will be up on our website, and we will do our best to respond to all the questions we've had, because there's been loads. But with that, just like to say thank you very much, and yeah, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.